Hi everybody, it's Eric Brown, MOBO-Media, MOBO-Media. Hey, I thought I'd get on here and, talk about an aspect of my life that was very significant. It was very significant for me. And a lot of trauma, loss, devastation, destruction, you name it. And so what this story is about a volcanic eruption in the Philippines called Mount Pinatubo in 1991. And my involvement with that volcanic eruption in 1991 was coupled also with the death of someone very close to me. And it really, I think, showed me that how precious life is, So, this video is, this is new for me. For me, the only way to deal with the trauma is to talk about it. I have a mental health background, psych, what do you want to call it? And so I've got to be able to use the same things that I teach other people, to not necessarily embrace your trauma, but to just remind yourself that the trauma is real, and you just have to find a way and find support systems to help you out of it. So for me, it started in 1991, and this video is going to be, I'm going to shorten the video. I'm going to kind of summarize on it, but I'm going to go there with some of the details, and but I have to summarize because it'd be a long video, but I will hit the high points. And so, in fact, the video would likely end up, I'm going to end up probably breaking the video into maybe 3 parts, 4 parts, but also keep the long form video. So the video is about something that occurred to me back in 1991, and it involved natural disaster. It involved personal loss. It involved, seeing, destruction up close, and it involved really just getting a glimpse of God's true power, to say the least. And so, I'll begin the story like this. So, when I left Fort Worth, Texas back in 1988, my first assignment was the Philippines. I went to the Philippines in 1988, and great country. Met a lot of, fellow American GIs, but also had a friend from high school that I was there with, Amos Turner. Amos Turner was in the Philippines with me. For some Dunbar folks that know who Amos Turner is, Amos Turner graduated with me in 1987. Somehow we ended up in the Philippines together, and that's another story. But we ended up, clicking real good. So the story begins in 1991. So my job in the Air Force is flight line. And flight line is where everything happens on Air Force bases. I mean, without a flight line, you don't have an Air Force base. Let me just put it to you like that. Everything on an Air Force base is there to support what's going on the flight line. Flight line is basically a huge, for lack of a better word, ramp with a lot of airplanes, a lot of different type of airplanes. They're taking off, they're landing, they're fixing them. You name it. Everything's happening on the flight line. Helicopters, fighter jets, transport planes. Just everything happens on the flight line. So we're considered the tip of the spear out there. So we support the pilots. We make sure they get off the ground. I was what's called an age mechanic, and my job was to support the equipment used to, get the planes off the ground and make sure they're operating good and they're performing, as they should. So in June, I think, about March of 1991, I think it was March of 1991. So I began to look over the way the flight line was in the Philippines. You literally could see mountains all around you. In a certain part of it, you look in a certain direction, you see nothing but mountains in the Philippines. And what happened was, one day I began to see smoke billowing from the top of this mountain. And it wasn't a lot of smoke, but it just didn't, it was odd. And so what happened was they ended up sending seismologists up to the mountain to see what it was. Now, for y'all that don't know what a seismologist is, these are folks that they basically monitor things below the earth. They can tell you when an earthquake may happen. They can tell you when a volcano is active or if it's dormant. I mean, they have equipment and technology that's highly sophisticated, and they can hear and they can tell just by what the volcano is doing, whether it's going to erupt or not. So keep in mind, this is March. March, this thing was, you know, it was doing its thing. It was smoking. And by the way, the only reason that local officials found out what was really going on, well, there were native folks that lived up in the mountains called Eta. Eta actually is they're black. They're you know, the original Filipinos Negrito or Eta, and they live in the mountains. They never come down out of the mountains. You know, they may come down to sell things like little weapons or little carbons or things like that. But what happened? There was someone saw something up there that was that blew their mind away. And so, long story short, I believe it was a lady that actually came down off the mountain and got a hold of one of the Philippine officials and said, "Hey, something weird is going on up there," right? So at first, I think the Philippine officials really didn't, you know, they didn't make much of it, you know what I'm saying? But they decided to investigate anyway. So what they did was they had some experts, a couple of Philippine experts, drive up there, up in the mountains, and it takes a bit of time to get up there, several hours, and they got up there, and they also saw something that didn't make sense to them. So what they began to do then was send helicopters over the mountain to see exactly what was going on. And what they saw was very troubling. It was very troubling. I mean, this thing was, it was acting up. It was spewing and spitting. It hadn't blown yet, but there was smoke and there was other elements from that volcano that let them know that you know, something serious was taking place. And keep in mind, one thing I forgot to mention, volcano Mount Pinatubo, this thing's been dormant over 100 years. I mean, it's dormant a long time. And so it was quite shocking to the folks that saw the activity going on around the volcano. So as I mentioned, I was on the flight line working. I would look over. I remember every day I look over this volcano and I see smoke, you know, coming off the top of the volcano. Didn't think nothing of it. I thought it was actually kind of cool. Like, man, look at this mountain, this smoke billowing out the top of it. You know what I'm saying? So fast forward, the Philippine government ended up getting some sort of agreement with some American seismologists and had them fly over to the Philippines, who had better equipment. They probably were more trained to make determinations on things like that. So when the American seismologists came to the Philippines, they also concluded something crazy was happening with this thing. And so, so March is when I began to see the smoke billowing from the mountain. And fast forward to June, March, April, May, June. Fast forward to June. In June, you know, 4 months after everything started, and you had seismologists, and they were saying, "Hey, this thing might erupt." Yada yada yada. They wouldn't for sure. They didn't know when or what, but they want to alert. And so, in June of 1991, I never forget, I was working, I don't know, maintenance stuff, doing whatever, maintenance complex. And typically when you get, when you have an emergency back home or like back in the States or wherever you're at, the military does a damn good job of notifying you. And if the emergency is severe enough, then they'll get you, they'll fly you back home like quick. But it takes a Red Cross notification to do that. Everything has to go through the Red Cross. It has to be official. So long story short, I was sitting doing maintenance, and all of a sudden, someone said, "Hey, Brown." You know, back then I was Airman Brown, and so they said, "Hey, you need to go. You got a Red Cross notification. You need to go to the Red Cross building, which is another part of the base near headquarters. Something's happened." They didn't want to tell me what happened. So I made my way over to the headquarters building, to the Red Cross building. And I received notification that my grandfather passed away. And my grandfather and I were extremely close. I mean, very close. I mean, he taught me, you know, I think I did another video with grandfather's hustle and things like that. He taught me the small things that make the biggest difference. You know, he taught me how to make $1. He taught me, you know, don't cut corners, and you work hard, and things will pay off. And I was a young guy when I was hanging with my grandfather. I'm talking about 12, 13, you know, 14, 15, you know. Just, I mean, I was very young. We would get up early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. We would find ways to make money, whether it be cutting grass or going around looking for junk to sell, looking for scrap metal to take to the, you know, the metal place to get money for it. And so my grandfather passed away. The next step was to get me back home. And so at the time I was married in the Philippines. I was married. I had already been married. And I'll never forget, I was like, it was, everything was cloudy for me because, for one, I didn't know he was sick. I mean, I had no communication. Back then, we didn't have internet and all this type of stuff. And, you know, typically you get a message be through a letter or something. Letter writing was a big thing back then. So the Air Force, they did a damn good job of getting me on the plane and trying to get me back home, right? And with the way it was looking, I would make it home in about 4 days, I think. Probably 4 days, 4 or 5 days tops. So I never forget. Made sure the wife was okay. Got my bags and stuff packed in the airport. Flew back home, flew to the States. But the thing is, when I hit the States, I think it may have been Washington or Seattle. I don't know where I was, but I never forget, man. I never forget. I was in the airport and I just lost it. I mean, I lost it. It really hit me. You know, grief was something that was pretty new to me because I hadn't really lost anybody that close to me like that before. I had other deaths and things like that, but not someone that's close to my granddad. So I never forget in the airport, I was just bawling. And I never forget, I kept trying to cover my face because I didn't want anybody to come over and ask me, was I okay? Because if they did that, it would have made it worse. I really would have lost it because I wasn't okay. But I had to get myself together and keep, you know, wiping off, shaking it off, and finally got back to Fort Worth. And guess what? I made it to Fort Worth probably, you know, 4 or 5 hours after the funeral, after he was buried. I can't begin to tell you how upset I was with that. Even today, it's still, I don't think I get over that. I won't get over that. You know, it's just something I'll just have to deal with. Life goes on, you know what I'm saying? But to miss my grandfather's funeral, to miss that opportunity for closure, to say goodbye, you know, it was tough. It was tough. There was questions raised. I began to ask questions like, how on earth did he get buried so fast, you know? Typically, you know, with deaths and funerals and things like that, especially the Black community, it's typically about 5 to 7 days, pretty much, a 7-day time period. He was buried in about 4 days. And I didn't understand. I did not understand that. And so I became upset. I was very upset because I felt that, you know, people knew how close I was to my grandfather. And excuse my French, but I felt like some folks just didn't give a damn. You know, how can I put this? It felt like the fact that I went off and tried to do something with my life, it felt like folks didn't recognize that. But, you know, at the time, I was the only family member outside of Fort Worth, let alone outside of the U.S. And so you would think that would prove to folks that, hey, I'm trying to do, you know, what I set out to do. But I missed the funeral. But something else struck me when I got to Fort Worth. I never forget when I made it to my grandmother's home. It started to get dark. It was like sun had set. And I never forget, man, it was just something weird in the air in Fort Worth when I got back in 1991. Keep in mind, I left in 88, so I hadn't been back since 1991. And when I did go back, it was one thing that my grandfather passed away. But what I was seeing all around me was not what I saw before I left Fort Worth. And what happened was I flew right back into the middle of the what's known as the crack epidemic. The crack epidemic. And I refuse to call it epidemic. To me, it was crack genocide because it was intentional. That those drugs were intentionally put into our communities. They had such a horrific ripple effect on our people. Even today, you got generations that are and will be disrupted because of what happened with that. And that still pisses me off. It pisses me off that some folks decided we weren't worth anything, so they would just push drugs into the community, you know, to kill us all. And they were partially successful. They were partially successful. There was a lot of it seemed like just about everybody was on crack. And, you know, I don't know, man. It was just the craziest thing. It was just dark. And there was just all this activity going on. Like everybody was moving fast. And I didn't understand what all this movement was about. And then in my grandmother's house, you know, I'm sitting in the living room, and then I think a gunshot went off, or someone thought they may have heard a gunshot, and everybody was getting ready to get on the ground. So I'm looking like, what is this? This is another Fort Worth I left. You know what I'm saying? Like, why is my grandmother have to get on the ground, her home, because some knuckleheads out there shooting guns and things like that, which is what it was. You know, crime was at all-time high. Crack had hit. The gang thing had started in Fort Worth. And, you know, I was just a newbie to it. You know, when I left, I think it was getting started, and I think I left, you know, just in the nick of time. So, it hurt my heart to know that my grandmother had to live like that. My family had to live like that, you know, with all the guns and the deaths that were going on, and people getting killed, and people addicted to everything from crack to heroin, and you name it. It was just all over, man. I never forget the night at my grandmother's house. I have a cousin named Shimon, call him Mun. And I never forget, Shimon was there, and Shimon has always been my ride or die cousin. You know, he's younger than me, but he's someone I always had my eye on, you know, because he's just a smart young man. I've always, to this day, he is a freaking intelligent man, Shimon is. And I never forget, him and I were out on the sidewalk in front of my grandmother's house talking. We were talking. And next thing you know, the SUV, black SUV pulls up. It pulls up. And somebody in the passenger seat yells at Shimon, "Hey, come here," you know, like that. Well, I felt it was kind of disrespectful, because I'm sitting there talking to him. You know, you gonna pull up and tell my cousin to come here? Who are you? Well, long story short, this guy was a guy named Pops that Shimon, you know, hung with, I guess, back then. A part of me wanted to check Pops, you know. But the other part of me knew that probably was a bad move, because I didn't know what was going on in Fort Worth. And I to this day, I think if I did check him, hell, I may not be here today, because there was just some rough stuff going on. I'll never forget when that guy told Shimon to come to the truck. Shimon felt like, in my opinion, he felt like he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. Does he go to this guy, or does he, you know, keep talking to his big cousin? And I think I went in and told Shimon, man, just go ahead, you know, go handle business over there. So he went and talked to the guy or whatever, you know what I'm saying? And I don't even know if Shimon got in the truck or left or what. I can't recall. But the environment at the time, man, like I said, I've always been one to walk carefully. I step different. You know, I stay out of the way. You know what I'm saying? But this is my city. This is my family. And I was just so confused. And keep in mind, I was still grieving. Still grieving for my grandfather. I was upset because the funeral had taken place and people knew I was coming home. And it's just like they did. I mean, well, let me stop that. I'm not going to say they didn't. For some reason, decision was made to bury him. Who cares if Eric was coming home? I don't say that in a mean way, but that's just how I felt at the time, you know. So I stayed in the Philippines. I mean, I stayed in Fort Worth when I got there. Probably a week and a half, because the Air Force allowed me time to go home and spend time with family, you know, to grieve and support each other. So I spent about a week and a half or so in the States. But when it was time for me to go back to the Philippines, I ended up flying back to the Philippines, but I didn't make it to the Philippines. So what happened was when they got me on the flight, I ended up on a large plane, a very large 747. Anybody know what a 747 is? I ended up flying on a 747 that was a military contract plane. The weird thing about this flight was there was only about, man, I tell you, there was probably 20 30 of us on this plane. This thing holds over 300 people, maybe 4. I can't remember, but holds more than 20 or 30 people. But there was 20 or 30 of us. I'll never forget. We had room we could stretch out and lay down on the the plane, all this stuff. And so as we're flying back to the Philippines, I never forget. Keep in mind, Mount Pinatubo was still doing this thing, this mountain with smoke coming off of it. So as we're flying toward the Philippines, we're over the ocean. And I'll never forget, the pilot comes over the radio and says, he says, hey, I got some unfortunate news to tell y'all. He says, an evacuation order had just been given for everybody to evacuate the base I was stationed at. Now keep in mind, you're talking, man, Clark, man, it must have been 10, 15,000 people at that base, man. I mean, it was the largest military installation overseas, put it to you like that. Clark is a huge base. And we're flying over, he came over and told us, we can't go to the Philippines. They've been given evacuation orders. So the folks at the military base that we were stationed at, they had to evacuate toward another installation, which was about a 45-minute drive without traffic, I think, to get down there to a naval base. It was a little safer. The reason for that is because this volcano was like sitting right next to the Air Force Base. I'm talking next to the Air Force Base, within miles. I mean, you can see the thing. So when they get evacuation order, the first thing that came to mind, I started thinking about, man, my wife, and how's she gonna, do that by herself, yada, yada, yada. After this guy came over the intercom on that plane and said he couldn't go to the Philippines because it was too dangerous and they had to turn around something, go back, whatever. I never forget. There was I saw a guy get up from his chair. He goes up there with the pilots, close the door, up where the pilots flying the plane. He goes up there, and he was a military leader. He was a high-ranking military leader, a full-bird colonel. And come to find out, he was in charge of one of the commands there. So, I don't want to get into military jargon, but just say he's a high-ranking guy, okay? Full-bird colonel. He goes up to the cockpit where the pilots are, close the door. About 20 minutes later, he comes back out the door. He gathers the 20 or 30 of us up. He said, hey, guys, come on. And I think there was may have been a lady, a couple ladies, where he said, I need to talk to y'all. He said, look, I just got permission to get this plane to the Philippines. He said, because you all have families there. He said, and I have a family there. And I'll be damned if we're not going to go there with our families in the middle of something as destructive as this volcano. So we were relieved. We were relieved that we were going home, going to the Philippines. When we finally got to the Philippines, obviously there was nerves, there was anxiety. We didn't know what to expect. You're talking 10 to 15,000 people evacuating and driving 45 minutes to another location south. It was just the craziest thing. And so, because the plane was so big and because Clark had evacuated, Clark is the Air Force Base I was stationed at, okay? The Air Force Base. The plane was not allowed to land at Clark because they issued the evacuation orders. So the decision was for the plane to land at the Navy base that everybody evacuated to. The problem with this is the Navy base are not, it's not meant to handle a plane that size that we were on. I mean, it's a huge plane, 747. I mean, hell, they use up all the runway just landing. But we did get it on the ground. We landed at the Navy base. And I never forget, man, there was just, we're all looking out the window trying to see, we're looking for thousands of people that had evacuated. I mean, but we saw nobody. Nobody. The plane landed and we went and parked somewhere. I never forget, man, We ended up staying on that plane for about 2 hours, sitting on that plane, on the tarmac. Out there just sitting. Nobody could get off the plane, anything, for 2 hours. You want to know why? Because the plane was so big and the Navy was not used to having a plane like that. They didn't have a ladder big enough to get us off the plane. You have to have they call it a ladder vehicle or something like that, thing that comes up and you walk down the steps. I mean, y'all seen the president, U.S., when he gets off his plane. It's something like that. So they had to go and find something to get us off the plane. And they finally got us off after about 2 hours. They had some buses, a bus or two, some shuttles waiting on us. We all got on the shuttle bus Again, we're still looking for all these thousands of people. Nobody. And we was like, what in the world? We thought there was an evacuation. Where are the people at? Man, I never forget. We drove probably 10 minutes away from the plane, 15 minutes. We hit a couple of streets, and I never forget, we drove down this one street and looked, and it just opened up. I mean, there was literally just thousands of people everywhere. Not just